All right, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
How's everybody doing? All right, good. There's signs of life out here. That's great to hear. Welcome to our February Borough Service Cabinet meeting. We're going to start and roll right into the agenda right after I take the roll call, so we'll start with that. Community Board 1, Community Board 2, Community Board 3,
Here.
Community Board 4, Community Board 5, Community Board 6, Community Board 7,
Here.
Community Board 8, Community Board 9, Community Board 10,
Present.
Community Board 11,
Present.
Community Board 12, present, Community Board 13,
Present.
Community Board 14,
Here.
Community Board 15,
Present.
Community Board 16,
Here.
Community Board 17,
Here.
Community Board 18.
Here.
All right, great. So our first agenda item is a brief presentation that was carried over from our January meeting. As you know, we had to kind of cancel the January meeting. There was a technical snafu, plus there was traffic snafus, and it was just not meant for us to meet. So we're carrying over this presentation by the Department of Finance Office of the Taxpayer Advocate. So at this time, I'd like to have the Taxpayer Advocate come up.
Thank you for having me. How many of you have heard of the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate in the Department of Finance? I never did. Oh, good. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about what our office does. It was created for two reasons. The first was to assist New York City taxpayers with business tax and property tax issues to make sure that their items don't get stuck into a black hole in the Department of Finance. So we do what we call case advocacy. So if you have constituents who've tried to work things out with the normal channels of the Department of Finance and are just getting nowhere, they can call our office, and we have case advocates who will be assigned. We will keep their case, and we will touch base with them every 2 weeks until we get a resolution or an answer to the case. In some instances, we've been up and running since about mid-October. We have close to about 80 cases, about 100 inquiries, and about 300 scree and dree cases. In some cases, in working the particular matter, we will advocate for either a change in the policy or a result. And so my office has the authority to go directly to the Commissioner of Finance to request that, and we've had 3 of them so far that we've requested a particular action. So much of what we do is what we call case advocacy. So if you have any constituents or people in your area who are having problems, they can certainly call our office. We have magnets in the front that have our phone numbers. We're also on the Department of Finance website. You can email us. They can get in touch with us any way they can. The second important part that we play is what we call looking out for systemic problems. These are problems as we're doing these cases or as we do outreach. We go to all the notice of property value sessions and the lien sale sessions. I do a lot of speaking, and I hear from a lot of people, and I hear constant problems. Then I know there's something wrong with the process, something wrong with the system, and those we call systemic problems. And we will be issuing in April a report of the 10 most serious problems facing New York City business and property tax owners. And in those instances, we work within the Department of Finance to try to change the process or bring to light to the Commissioner why the process is not working. So the two go hand in glove, and we are certainly always available to be contacted. We get a lot of contacts from council members, from community board members. We'd be happy to come and speak at any of your meetings. I know this is a really tough time right now. The notice of property value went out. Brooklyn seemed to got hit a little. We're getting lots of inquiries about that, but we would certainly answer anything that you send to our office. Any questions?
Yeah, do you handle tax problems with nonprofits?
In terms of property tax exemptions, yes. And we've had a couple. One of the things, one of the cases we have currently, which is sort of really sad, is we have a church that was a victim of deed fraud. And so we're working with them and their attorney to make sure that the deed can get corrected so we can help them go back to their tax-exempt status. I think one of the things that we're identifying in our reports, and we'd love to work with all of you, is a need to sort of a simple brochure for houses of worships and religious organizations, sort of how to navigate the system. So if any of you are interested in that, please contact me. We'd be happy to work on something like that.
On your assessment of systemic problems, is that something that's gone on for years back?
This is, you mean, the identifying them?
Identifying and then doing a report.
This is the first time. So I started the office, my background, I was a lawyer for almost 30 years, and I was a director of a low-income taxpayer clinic, and I'm very familiar with the National Taxpayer Advocate. So when I came in, one of the things I said to the commissioners, I think we really need to do a report. So it's going to be, you know, thin on data because we've only been open for a little more than 6 months, I guess. But one of the thoughts is this will be the first time we do it. And then I'm hoping as we go in the future, we'll be able to do a report card each year as to where we are in it. So this is, as far as I know, this is the first time we've done it.
Great job.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciated coming and talking to you, and I hope that you will call me or...
Do you have a card?
I do have cards, and I have those there, but I'll give you my business card. And we're at 253 Broadway. We have walk-ins. People come and see us. So if you're in the neighborhood, come see us. All right?
Great, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Look at that, we're just rolling right along now. So for our next agenda item, we're going to have a conversation with Department of City Planning on the new needs statement process. I know last year we did a presentation, I believe it was June, on the new needs process that was going to be due in August. So there wasn't a lot of time to really dive into some of the questions that people had about the new process and get some community board input. And I know one of the concerns that was raised was that the community boards wanted a chance to offer some more constructive feedback into how the process works and how their input can be more valued. So trying to do that on the early end this year, take stock of how the last year's process went from the DCP side, from the community board side, and then talk about additional feedback or suggestions or ideas that we can talk about moving forward. So with that, I will turn it all over to our folks from DCP.
Thanks. Thanks, Andrew. My name is John Kaufman. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of City Planning, and I also look after the group that works on the community needs statements with all the different community boards. And I think I would have met some of you earlier back in June, as Andrew talked about, when we rolled out this version 1 of this new process. We've gotten a lot of feedback about the process and some of the things that you liked about it and some of the things you didn't like about it. And we've also been talking to the agencies quite a bit about what part of it's working for them and what part of it they'd like to also get improved information on. So what we're hoping to today is just talk to you and really have a discussion with you all about hearing firsthand your experiences with both the form as well as the process and underlying concerns about the city needs statement process. In addition, the OMB, the portion of that, the specific budget requests and how those are handled are also something we want to know more about. And some folks from OMB are also here and will take over a part of this when we get into the discussion. It has to do with more of the things that they handle directly. Let me introduce 2 other people who you probably know. Sarah Goldwyn, who runs planning coordination, I think is familiar to many of you, and Ralph Blessing also on the team. Aaron Dottie is someone else who's recently joined the team, but collectively this is one of the responsibilities of this planning coordination group. Before we jump in, quickly what we're going to try to get through in as much time as Andrew wants to allocate to this is firstly just remind the group a little bit about what we're trying to do with this reform overall and why we bothered to make any changes. And so I'll spend just a few minutes on that. And then Ralph and Aaron Dottie will step through some of the early feedback we've got and just try to structure the discussion a little bit on what you liked or didn't like about it. Again, we've gotten informal feedback along the way. We made our own observations as to how it was being received across all 5 boroughs. And recently there was a survey that went out that I think about half of you filled in so far that gave us some more feedback to run with. So we'll test those certain ideas and at the very end come back to you and see if you've got something else that wasn't mentioned. We want this to really be a listening session for us so that when we can go away and think about how to refine the process, we reflect your input in that. This is not the last chance you'll have to talk to us about it. We are going to do some listening in all 5 boroughs, sort of huddle amongst ourselves as to how do we make this better, and then come back and trial some of these things ahead of announcing the new process for next year. Let me just spend a couple minutes talking about the goals of the reform. And again, this is, I think, worth just commenting on because we know that there was a lot of challenges for some of you to kind of adjust to this news cycle so quickly. We did our best to kind of make it easier and provide as much support as we wanted to, but we also knew that things were going to be hard. When you change things this dramatically, things are going to be more difficult. And it's really important to us that you understand what we're trying to do, and that while it didn't maybe feel that way, we are trying to make this an easier and more productive tool for us to listen to the communities and the community boards specifically. A few things we're trying to do here. One is we're trying to actually simplify this production process for the community boards. We had a very open-ended approach to doing it in the past, where there was a lot of flexibility for you to design whatever you wanted to do for the statement, and we know that helped you make sure that you could say what you wanted to say for the rest of the community to sort of refer to. We also heard from some of you that there were different processes across community boards. No two community boards seemed to do it exactly the same, and as a result, we got output that was very different by community board. From a city listening point of view, it was very hard to process. We had 59 different statements from each community board, every one of those in a different format, and every one of those would land on somebody's desk in a department, and it's about this thick of 59 different formatted reports. And when we heard from you that you don't feel the agencies are always acting on it, that was one reason why, is they get something that's this tall in very different formats, and it's very hard for them to evaluate it succinctly. And for us, we're trying to move somewhere to a middle ground where there is flexibility for you all to put in everything you want the agencies to hear and other audiences to hear, but in a standardized format that allows them to digest it a little more easily. So part of this is to simplify that process overall that we're trying to do. We also heard from many of you that the needs process and the budget requests were sort of two separate things that weren't really necessarily tied together. Whereas again, for the agencies and for the city, they're very closely related. And so we were trying to have a single timeline and more of an integrated path working with our OMB partners. And that was one reason why we did kind of connect them in a way, and in this case had a very accelerated period of time to do it. We think the next year we'll be better at that, but we sort of remain committed to the idea that we want to keep it synced with the OMB database budget requests, because they are so closely related, and the agencies, the same people at the agencies look at them and want to sort of see the connection between what you need and what you're actually asking for. Another thing we wanted to do is make it easier for you to find the relevant resources, to think about how we're looking at the community and what the data says. The way we tried to do that was to embed resources into the actual form itself. And so when you're looking at a policy area for public safety, you can find links directly to talk about crime in your area, for example. That was something we thought we did an okay job at. We think we can do better, but the idea is to make everything kind of in one form for you to sort of find the links and the information that you want overall. And again, we're open to how we can improve that further. The fourth bullet here talks about establishing a format for more specific and actionable recommendations to relevant agencies. This is the part where we sort of said, don't write in exactly what you want. We want you to choose from this drop-down menu or click on these links about specific requests. That, again, for us was a way that we can very quickly summarize for the agencies, how many pothole repair requests you have and which community board are they in. To do that, we need to have very specific language so that, again, it can very easily be tabulated overall. And so this is a part that we know the agencies are very excited about, which was that instead of trying to deduce from a community board request what they want, or to have to call them and understand really what they need, we try to get the language specific so that it's words that they understand, and it's words of the way they think about doing their planning. Again, that's something that was very successful from our end, to have literally 550 specific requests. That is what kind of the government can do in each of these different agencies. And where there's confusion about the requests, it's an opportunity for us to share with you how we think about operating these different departments. And so again, that's something that we think worked out very well this year. The fifth goal here is to foster more substantive planning discussions between city leaders and community boards. We're hopeful that this format allows you to sort of, again, more succinctly engage with your council member or different agencies at the borough budget consultations, which is kind of a standardized format. We think, again, if once we get this right, it will allow you to kind of have something, a reference, if you will, that's quite easily understood by others, and it's the same format for everybody, and so that, again, it's something that they understand what you're going to be requesting and what format it's in, and they're not having to sort of go through different reports to understand exactly what you want. Again, for us, the jury's still out on that, and that we know that we're at the very beginning of this process, but we hope that, again, going forward, you'll find this useful tool for having a better dialogue with various constituents. And the last thing we're trying to do is an overarching goal of trying to make sure that we are more responsive to the community board needs and service delivery and infrastructure planning. Again, the whole idea here is we've got a much better codification of what you all feel like your communities need. It's on the record, and it's something that we can share more broadly and not have to train every audience on kind of how to find their way through a form. At the end of the day, we want you all to have a more effective voice working with the city, which is a complicated body, and we're hopeful that this is a step down that path, and in aggregate, you're worthy of going through this kind of pain of trying to figure out how do you contort your community board process to fit this form. We know it wasn't easy. We know it was a tight timeline. We've got some great results back that the agencies are quite happy with, and so I think on our end we feel like we're on a solid footing in the right direction. Obviously, we need to make sure it works for you all, and we know for many of you it did not work. Although many of you did, we've definitely heard the voices where some things are still are too hard, and that's kind of a little bit what today's about, to understand more from your comments and hear your firsthand experiences. Before I hand it over to Ralph to lead that part of the discussion, I will say we have 59 different community boards, again, all of whom have a different kind of process, and so there's going to be some level of standardization for us to just achieve this, and we're looking for your cooperation and kind of patience as we try to get that balance right. We're not trying to add work to your workload. We know you have a lot of other things to do, and this is something that you are already giving a lot to your communities. But we do, we hope for the second year, or as we go through this, it'll be easier the next time around. But at the end of the day, we want to find this happy medium between you all getting your voice in the shape and the content you want to express it, but also in a way that we can practically get those 59 different voices to the agencies in question to actually fairly evaluate and understand. Are there any questions about the goals of the reform or any of the stuff that I've talked about so far? None? Okay. Again, we're happy to return to any of this as we go through it. Ralph's going to take you through, again, a few different specific comments to try to hear about different parts of this process. And again, we'll try to flesh out the examples a little bit that you raised.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So, as John already mentioned, we heard a lot of comments from you as we were going through the process this year. Marlon and Arundhati talked to many of you while you were completing the forms. Some people sent us letters that we considered, and we also had the survey. So what we did with this information, we tried to sort it out a little bit and put it into buckets that might guide us through this discussion session today. So the problems that you have identified have to do with form training and support, the whole timeline of the process, the structure and some of the technology involved in the form, the new CD reports that we prepared with your inputs, and also some of you mentioned the budget, the borough budget consultations as an issue. And once again, to discuss that with you, I'm happy that we have folks from OMB here today, Lester Siegel, Jay Gottlieb, and Carolyn Haggerty, who will be able to discuss those things with you. So in order to keep this crisp, I would like to start with the first topic of discussion. So the first one is about form training and support. And what we heard from you through all those different channels was that you felt there wasn't enough training before the new form was rolled out, and that the schedule of the training did not really work for a lot of you because it coincided with the summer break that many of the community boards take. And some of you also felt that there wasn't sufficient support while you were working on the form. So the first thing that I would like to ask you, does this sort of summarize correctly the issues that you encountered? Yeah.
I would say what you missed is there's a presupposition here that we bought into the fact that you did this without our input, prescribed it to us, and then didn't train us properly. And I think one of our big complaints is that we thought we should have been brought into the process in the formation of the form. So if we accepted that you did it without our input and thought it was all, thumbs up, then this would address the concerns in the aftermath of that. But I think that bringing us in to the process, to help form the process, there's still an opportunity for that as you improve it, so I would like to see that up there.
Okay. Thanks, that's a very good point. Yeah?
I was going to wait, but I realized how long your presentation would be and how distilled my message might be if I were to be patient and wait for you to go through all of the points that you've determined from your evaluation of your system that you wanted to talk to us about today. Starting off by saying all of the things that were really important to you about this great process. Frankly, to pick up on what Sean said, at no point did you ever, thank you. At no point did you ever ask us what was really important to us about this process. That was missing from day one. And frankly, I could not buy into a system that was not designed with my input. I boycotted using the system. I will continue to boycott using this system. It does not reflect what my needs or desires are. Frankly, I think you put a lot of effort into trying to shape the community boards, put us into boxes, make us do things according to the standards that you developed to comply with whatever formula that you wanted us to follow along with. At no point did we ever have an opportunity to talk to you about the formulas that we wanted to see the agencies comply with, as far as the responses to our budget requests, as far as giving us an opportunity to shape them, to get intelligent responses instead of the bullshit responses that they give us every year, so that we can continue to evolve the requests, make them more meaningful, instead of just cut and pasting them every year. We cut and paste our requests because they cut and paste their responses. It's been a sick dance all of these years, and we really haven't been able to make very much progress. Along the lines of a better way of capturing information from the agencies, you've really given us nothing in return for this entire process. You've made us change the way we do things. We're not getting anything out of this. You hope that it would do this. You hope that it would do that. There are no guarantees. There's nothing for us in these changes that you've done. Nothing at all. Understand that. That is a very frustrating place for us to be. The agencies do not provide us anything different. They're giving us the same kind of responses. Frankly, it would have been nice if we had a discussion about revising the reports that OMB uses to make them more meaningful for us, so that when the agencies populate those answers in those reports, we can actually understand what they're saying, that you would be able to force the agencies to provide us with better responses so that we can inform the requests in future years. And the negative responses that we receive from the agencies are so well hidden. Parks Department says, we would love to fund a project like this, go talk to your borough president and city council member. In my mind, that is a negative response to a capital budget request, because $0 are being put in the budget. And the charter says for every negative response, we're supposed to get a letter for each item explaining why they're providing a negative response. Most social service agencies, when you make a request of them, they tell you this would be great if we get federal and state aid, we will consider doing something like that. Again, $0 are going into the budget. In my mind, that is a negative response to a capital budget request. We don't get those individual letters that the charter requires them to provide. I think that the system that you rolled out was not tested, it was sloppy, and frankly, it provided a lot of garbage to OMB that they then had to try to sort through and figure out how to process the requests, because it didn't comply with what their standards were. I think that OMB has kind of been left twisting in the wind now. They used to have 6 members on staff, they're down to 3. The other 3 have never been backfilled. We've always suspected that OMB as an agency never really treated this unit seriously, because they weren't on the inside of OMB doing what everyone else at OMB was doing. They interacted with the community boards, and everybody sees us as this wild card outside of government. The fact is, we are a city agency. We're a non-mayoral city agency. And frankly, I think that was unfair to do to OMB, to put them in that position, to have them deal with the garbage input from your untested system before it was rolled out. Department of City Planning is not inside the city's budget.
OMB is. It would be a travesty if this process were ever taken away from OMB. It would mean the loss of the potential for us to be fully inside the budget, where I hope that we would be able to get deeper into. And frankly, I'm not going to participate in a system like this until there is effort put into working on the other side of the formula, until you can generate a report like this and give it back to the agencies about all of the things that they're not doing for us.
Thank you for your input. I think there are a lot of really valid points in there, and appreciate the interest you have and commitment in getting this right. And again, I think part of what we're doing here today is to hear more of that kind of feedback and what exactly are the things that you're disappointed in or discouraged by. And I've got a bit of a list there from what you've commented on. And again, I hope you can see that we are here to listen, and you may be disappointed that we're here, but we're hoping that it's going to be a constructive discussion. It can be very positive about the things you'd like to see. I think a couple of things I just would clarify from what you've said in terms of the process design. We did test it with some of the community boards and the borough presidents. This wasn't kind of a blind, let's just throw it out there. At the same time, there was a decision made to say we're not going to go test it with 59 community boards. In retrospect, I think we should have gone a lot deeper on talking to more people. And at the time, again, we were under an expedited timeline. So it wasn't complete ignorance about involving the people who were making the change. It was rather a choice that we made about to make it, well, clearly too light for what you all had in mind. The other thing I guess I want to correct right away is that we are working very closely with OMB. It's not a separate effort. It is kind of a connected effort with different responsibilities. And they have a very dedicated team who tries to push this as far as they can with the different agencies. And I think for this group, I can tell you there's no, having DCP and OEB work on this together is the most likely, it will improve the hearing ability of the agencies. I agree with you that it should never be taken away from OMB, and they're central to this whole thing, and that's not at all what's being, it's not even under discussion. I mean, this is a joint exercise, it always has been. We're trying to connect the needs to the budget request so that we are in sync with what we're telling the agencies, rather having than two separate processes that tell the agencies two different things. So those are just two things I wanted to clarify that many of you may have been wondering about. The other thing I'd say is that I think there are some people who are very clearly disappointed in the process, and sounds like you're. I would also say, from our survey, and again, maybe it's a silent majority is actually quite happy with the changes we've made and feel like it is a more easily digestible document. They feel like it's easier to produce, and they're hopeful that they'll get more action out of the agencies at the end of this. So while I think there are people who are very disappointed, and we want to spend time listening to you. We're hearing from a lot of our community boards that actually feel like this is an improved process. They get more support. We're also hearing from the agencies, who are the ones who evaluate the requests, that this is actually an easier way to evaluate it. And so while I know there's things we need to change, we'd like to be careful on kind of how far we go to say this is not working, because actually many people feel it is working. Again, I don't dismiss, and I want to hear more about those of you who are disappointed, but we trying to listen to all 59, cannot ignore the people who like the process as well.
Just a quick follow-up. You wanted to replace your hope that the agencies would get better information from us with a system that was designed to do that. We hope to get better information from the agencies to us, and until there's an opportunity for us to design that part of the system with you, I have no interest in working with you on this system.
Yeah, and that's, again, I think it's a very, reasonable desire. And again, the agencies are getting, we're working with them to say what's the format that works in the best, but things like adding in, specific locations for requests, things about using the words that agencies use to plan, those all help them look at it more fairly. And so again, it may be sort of subtle to you or on the margins, but those things are the things that allow them to say, okay, I know where exactly this street is now flooding. I don't need to make 13 calls to find out exactly where it's flooding. It's more work for your end to sort of put in the location, but those kind of things, again, when they're looking at hundreds of requests, that's 100 avoided phone calls to community boards to understand where exactly the thing is happening. And so again, we're trying to make it.
I don't think I'm being heard by you. I just want to make sure that my colleagues understand where I'm coming from, because nobody's more enthusiastic about building a better mousetrap than I am. I'm a systems person as far as how I think about things, and I would love nothing more than to have a system that works for us.
Yeah, and again, I think we're all trying. I'd say it's a common system. It works for you and for the city. I mean, we could, if you want to make a system purely for community boards, that's something that you can do. If you want something that works for the city, I think that's where we have to sort of just work together to try to design that. Again, we're not trying to stop anything you're doing. We're saying to try to help channel it to the agencies in a very constructive format. But I do want to hear from some other people who may have some thoughts on this. And again, to the extent that you feel like there's an objective here that we're not meeting for you, that would be great to hear about. I mean, when you say at the beginning, this isn't what you want, you're hearing from you, kind of what are the shortcomings of what this is versus what you want. I mean, obviously I've heard about the reply to budget requests. It could be much more thorough and much more meaningful to you. I think that's a very legitimate request, and our OB folks will talk about that when we get to that part of the discussion. But I guess I'm trying to go a little bit upstream when you say, you and a few others feel like this is not designed for what you want. Maybe elaborate a bit more what parts of it are not hitting the mark here.
Just to follow up what Craig said, and I back him up everything he said, but what I think he meant, you said before that you'll listen and then you'll huddle. I think he meant huddle with him and some of us. That's what he's pointing. Huddle with us, and let's come up together with something.
Yes, and we're what we're doing right now is listening to 59 different community boards, and then when we huddle and have a suggestion, I think we'll come back to the boards and test it, as many of you have wished we'd done for the start. So we're coming back to you before we roll it out again. I think, as you can imagine, it's a complicated system on the city side to run all these requests through, and we think we can, an intermediate step of us just saying, well, what do all 59 boards want, and how do we find a middle ground? That's part of what we're planning to do. We're not going to outsource this to the community boards. It's not, again, for many of you want to be involved, I think they would say we want the cities who are going to be responding to this to help think about the design. We want to get your input. We want to make sure the next round is better than this round. I feel like we're on a path to do that, but I think also I don't want to, you have to respect there's 59 different boards who want 59 different things. If you all want to, if there's a coalition in Brooklyn that says, okay, these things are really important to us, we'd love to hear about that more succinctly. But again, part of this meeting is to hear about what is it exactly in the needs part of it, for example, that you feel this is not hitting, so we can sort of try to blend that into that first huddle. Are there other comments around just this? Ralph sort of teed up this sort of form training and support, and I believe Craig sort of wanted to comment more broadly. If there are any other odd comments, we can hear them now. Otherwise, I'd suggest we return back to these, looking at each part of it, because that allows us, again, to think about where things might be improvable. So in this first part, form training and support, again, we heard that there was not enough training before the new form had rolled out, or in filling out the form. We also know that, again, Aaron, Dottie, and Marlon were kind of available at all times to reach out to you to sort of, and if you had a problem, you could call them and say, hey, I don't understand the form, or hey, I don't understand what to do with this policy area. Did any of you have, I guess, positive or negative experiences through that you want to talk about?
I didn't get callbacks when I had questions. And then, had this been the only thing I was doing for days on end, I could have followed up, but that was a problem.
Okay, that is a problem.
Response.
Thank you.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean, again, our goal was, if anyone calls us, that we call them back. So that's just a fail from beginning to end. So we know we contacted many community boards, and we thought we made it patently obvious we're ready, but it maybe is an issue clearly with CB14.
And then the other thing is, I don't think that there's just one training that we're going to get and then we're going to hit the ground running. I mean, I recognize this as a process, and this is the first step in a process, and you can count me as frustrated but still optimistic.
Great. Well, thank you, and we will register more regular, frequent training and kind of recognizing people have different schedules.
Is there also a particular training format that you would prefer? I mean, you probably came to the training we had at 22 Reed Street. Would be a more hands-on training better for you, or what are folks thinking about that? How could we make the training itself better?
Ralph, I think that's it. I think hands-on, being able to sit in front of a computer, actually navigate, instead of watching somebody else navigate. It looks easy when somebody who already knows how to do it is doing it. But then, and I thought it looked pretty straightforward, and then when I jumped in, I found it difficult to get from page to page, to keep things open. It'd be nice to have split screens, stuff like that. Jumping around, eventually it became easier as I did it, like all things do. But I think more hands-on, especially for those who haven't done it before, would be a good first training step.
Okay, great. Yeah.
There was a lot of, when we went to the training presentation, it looked very straightforward. But when you look at when I went back and looked at my individual report and my needs, I realized the details and the differences in the pre-formatted options didn't really cookie cut fit my needs. And it took me a lot longer than I had anticipated in trying to get to reflect my community board's needs within this new format. And that was a lot more difficult. I think that the end result of my final product didn't really reflect my true community board's budget needs after I looked at the finishing. There were items that were prompted that I didn't think about or our board hadn't discussed that I think we could probably discuss in the future to include in a future needs statement. But I think in part of the training that we should have had the opportunity to go through all of that and see that before we actually delved into it.
Yeah.
So maybe, as Sean said, a more one-on-one, not one-on-one, but at least have the opportunity more of a hands-on session.
And I think also the point you made about having all the needs correctly reflect your community board needs is something that we definitely want to consider and where we would like your input moving forward so that everything is captured that you want to have captured in those reports.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we heard from some other community boards was that it wasn't time to digest kind of the new format and time to really adjust your internal processes in terms of how you actually generate the content. And so again, I think our working with you earlier to say this is kind of how the form's laid out and this is how you might talk to your chair about it, or this is how you might change the way you guys do internally to produce it in a timely manner without burdening anybody or particularly burdening everybody will be an issue. Is that something you think you'd find helpful? Is just kind of a couple maybe slides that sort of that allow you to present to somebody else how this works?
Yeah, I think that would be. Also, I think it's some of the recommendations that we have made for our budgetary needs were limited over the years by agency, and some of the topics that were included, some of the pre-formatted, for example, some of the human resources, which are items that we had not previously discussed as a board. And I felt that because we didn't include them, I didn't want anyone to get the feeling that we didn't care about human resources issues within our board or within the city. So I think it was a lot more detailed by agency than we had previously looked as an individual board. So I guess my bottom line answer to you is yes.
Yeah, and I presume the earlier we get that out, the better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I believe I'm correct when I say tracking codes were changed this year. And one of the important pieces of information that the tracking codes always gave was the year in which we originally made the request. So I think one of the important pieces of information is missing now. If we made this request originally in 1982, I don't care how embarrassing it is for the agency, I want it to reflect 1982.
That was indeed what we did this year. This had something to do with the fact that it's a new system, so the tracking codes will make a comeback.
Makes us look like we weren't on top of it for 3 decades.
The other thing that we want to add is maybe a button where you can indicate that this was a previously submitted request. But we heard this from a lot of community boards, and we're trying to address that.
We're also limited in terms of the number of capital and expense requests that we're able to submit. And our needs statement has always kind of been this longer, elaborate dialogue of needs that not necessarily would fall within the specific budget requests, but more of a budgetary need by agency. So when you kind of marry the two, I think you lose a little bit, and if you want to include more, they're not going to be reflected in the capital and expense needs. That's not to say that those aren't important, but they may not make your top capital and expense list by community board. So that was kind of a difficult area to navigate and kind of reconstruct our list on the new system.
I just want to add on, piggyback to what Josephine said. Because we didn't add a narrative to those capital and expense requests, it listed that we had no input on it. And I don't think that's necessarily true, and it made us look like we weren't addressing those things or weren't important, we just didn't link them to a priority. So if I had 25 capital, and I didn't link something to that, it came up that the board didn't have real input on this matter, and that shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think that that clearly a mischaracterization at a minimum with that, some of that automation there. I will say that, and I think it's we need to do a better job of allowing you to sort of express overarching concerns without a budget request in some cases, and maybe to more strong in your emphasis on those things. Our goal for that is that to be part of the narratives for a policy area, which agencies do see. So even though if they don't see the budget request, they will see the narrative for that policy area from your community board separately. So it's included in the what the agencies get. It's just it may not be clear to you that that's the case, and moreover, some of those wordings may give the wrong impression that there isn't a thing. So I think we've heard about,
especially when it goes to the public.
right. We've heard of the need to sort of make sure there's not a limit on the narrative part of it. That if you want to write 5 pages about crime, that we want you to have a chance to do that and put it on the record. For example, and so make sure that there's enough room for you to do that, while again making sure perhaps using the language to soften a bit on the fact there's no budget request associated with this. Again, the thing we're trying to balance is, in that example, the police department will read if there's 5 pages from a community board, that's 250 pages on on crime that will get to it. But part of it is us balancing, trying to encourage you to be succinct so that they will digest it more easily versus the need that you have for other audiences who also read it, where it may be another reason why you want to sort of spend more time on it.
I think my point is that if I didn't provide, I don't think it should be listed that I didn't provide. It just wasn't a priority, a high priority to the board at that point. It doesn't mean it's not important.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah. I got you.
Okay.
So, anything else on training? So I would suggest we move on to the next. The next point that you mentioned is with regard to the timeline of the CD needs and budget request process, and what John already mentioned and what I think we all know is that there simply wasn't enough time last year for completing the document. And also that it didn't really take into account the way your boards work with different committees in place that have to discuss that, and then it sort of gets all folded up into one document by the board. Am I correct in that those are the most important issues that you encountered, and is there anything that we've been missing about the general timeline? Yeah?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's never enough time for anything, ever.
Yes, indeed.
So I think the timing of not enough time, the timing of not enough time is important. I just don't want to gloss over. It's like there's never going to be enough time. So if we situate the deadlines differently, it's not going to add time, but I think that it will make more sense. And again, I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but this is where having our input in the formation of the process, you said you didn't account for how boards work. Well, silly you. I mean, we were right here. The other thing is in this is the process by which, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but to time now what the point we're at now with starting to feed into budget consultation agendas, because that kind of isn't in here. But these requests and the agency feedback, there should be a system for now taking that in order to form some generalized across-the-board question for those agency agendas.
I think that's a very good input. And what we would like to know from you is, granted there is never enough time, when would be the time to start the process in an ideal world?
Well, I mean, don't you think don't you think it's ongoing? I mean, we might not be able to implement everything we decide to do or we decide is a good thing, a good idea now for the next process, but you put it on a back burner for the following year. Because I imagine this is never going to become a stationary or a static process. We're going to be changing as city priorities change, as budget. So, ongoingly is my one-word answer.
Okay. I mean, obviously there's some, we have to change the form, we have to make some process changes, but what we would also like to know is basically when it's too late for you.
For what part?
For submitting the preliminary form.
Anybody else? We were asked to do it over the summer when our boards don't meet, so I would say anytime after, we need to bump it up into the actual session season.
So, April?
The deadline in April?
No, not the deadline in April. Rolling out the form in April, the deadline being...
Why can't the form be available all year long until the deadline and then close it down to do the report building and then open it back up as soon as that's done?
That is actually the goal, but...
Go for it.
The other thing is that what I heard from you is that you have a lot of changes that you would like us to make. So those would have to be implemented in order to make sure that you enter something into the form and the form changes too much. So I'm with you that we believe that budgeting and thinking about those priorities should be a year-long process, and that the downtime should be as short as possible. But working this year with, as I hear from you, some major changes in the works, we just want to sort of figure out what the best thing would be for you.
Right, but it's sounding to me like the constraints are more your constraints in terms of the timing. What we want is your ultimate goal, but your ability to meet that ultimate goal is constrained by what you have to do to make the changes that you're getting feedback in order to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should differentiate.
I don't think the ball's in our court.
I think we should differentiate between two things. One is we want to do a cleanup before we launch it next time. I think the idea is, making it steady state so it's out there for you to work on whenever your board wants to, realizing, at some point in time, we're going to sort of grab the snapshot of what it is so we can process it. But I think what Ralph's trying to get at is, if you think about your process now, how long does your community board really need to build this generally? Is it sort of 2 weeks? Is it 12 weeks? What is the range of needs? You say, listen, we need it, if we want to use this for borough budget consultations, for example, and we want to get it to the agencies 2 weeks ahead of that consultation so they can read them, how much time before then do you need to have kind of available to you to sort of feel like this is going to be a good product?
I like to echo Sean. I'd like to see it open to let each board allow for their own individual discussions. But for Community Board 10, during the month of February, we take a look at the responses from the agencies. They're always abysmal, and we prepare our comments. And this year, what we were hoping to do is through March, through June, before we go into the summer hiatus, is to really begin to look at our priorities and prepare for budget consultations. So I would like to see by June that we have the opportunity to sit and work with our boards, at least I want the opportunity to work with my board on these issues as we prepare for both budget consultations as well as our priorities that we vote on in October. And from my perspective, I think that must be done by the month of June. So that it's the most efficient and reflective document that we could produce as a board. And I'd like to have the opportunity to I'm going to fill out, I didn't do my survey, and specify those areas that we would like to see added to be more reflective of not only our board, but maybe representative of my colleagues' concerns. Thank you.
Okay, anything else about the general timeline of the process? Jay? Also, this year you will get last year's form, so there will be less entering involved into the form. So you obviously you should edit and update it accordingly, but that's something we're also planning to do. So I saw a lot of nodding with June 1st.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else about the timeline? So the next point I would like to talk with you about is the general structure of the form. And what we heard from you was the word limits were too low, that some of you wanted more space to express your community's needs, that it was not quite clear which budget requests go to in which section, that similar budget requests were in different sections, that not all agencies are listed in the budget requests, and also what a lot of you said was a problem, the inability to export the form into different formats like a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet, and so on. Many of you said prioritizing the budget request was difficult, and it was also difficult to navigate between the different pages. Is there anything you would like to that list?
I think it would be pertinent for you to add a separate section in the document to state whether or not something is an actual budget request or a needs statement item, so that we don't have a proliferation of, for instance, our board had 90 expense items that we had to pare down to 25 because of the fact that the two documents were collapsed into one, the needs statement and the budget. I think you need to separate the two documents, or have some clickable link where we can say this is a needs statement item and not a budget item, so that we don't get confused and say, now we have to go through this populated list and actually prioritize each and every one of them. And also, when in your prioritization list, it comes up in no particular order. It doesn't even come up in order of the agency. It's some random order, and when we go through the list to find what we need to prioritize, it's very difficult to actually find what we're looking for. I know that you tried to give the little number on a page, but not being able to toggle back and forth between the pages easily made it extremely difficult to find the item that we're looking to prioritize.
Okay, so if I hear you correctly, you don't think that just the capital and the expense correctly, categories correctly capture what your community needs, that there's other requests that don't really fit those categories nicely.
And
yeah.
I think where the problem lies is that city planning decided to put the onus on only city agencies to actually provide the needs for the community, instead of looking to some of the nonprofit agencies that are giving federal and state funding to supply some of the needs to the community. So if you can actually put in some type of system where you recognize that fact, that would be excellent for us and make our lives a lot easier.
Yeah. And I think this is also something where we could really use your help, because you're the ones who work with those agencies and actors more closely than we do. I think we're definitely looking forward to improving that piece of the forum.
I think on that topic, we've heard again from other boards that there are a lot of other audiences than city agencies, and they felt a bit constrained, or that this was solving too much for the city and not enough for other needs. So I think, as Ralph said, hearing from you all as to what are those most common non-city agencies that you feel are reading your report or can grant you money, we'd love to fold that into the process. And so I think that is definitely worthy of kind of a small group of people who are interested in that. I think your other point around having other things besides budget requests being flagged more clearly, one thing we discussed at another meeting was having almost like a policy request, which had less to do with about a specific dollar amount or location and more about what you're saying. These are needs that we have that we want to talk about, but they're not actually specific dollar requests in certain places. So that's something else that I think we'll try to fold in. And of course, the prioritization page itself, we've definitely gotten a lot of feedback that was very clunky, and when you have 90 things in front of you, it's hard to design it, but we did not do, in the end, we did not make it easy for you all to do that.
Want some positive feedback?
Sure.
I really found it useful to have the links to the different resources right there in the form. I can't remember, was the MMR one of the links? Or did I have to go outside? Okay, yeah. So I thought that was great. And maybe even some more budget. I find that, I notice this a lot in our budget consultations. Sometimes we ask for things at budget consultations that are actually federally funded, for instance. So maybe more information on what's really coming out of city tax levy in terms of what our options are in terms of the asks.
That was actually, when we developed those requests, we talked to city agencies, and we basically asked them, what are the things that you can do versus other actors? So if it wasn't in there, there might be a good chance that it wasn't actually a city responsibility, but at the same time, I think what is missing, and the way I understand you, is that it needs to be sort of an educational. You want to see those things too, but probably know that it doesn't go to the city but to a different agency. So that's certainly something that I think we should address. Yeah?
So let me agree with Sean that sometimes items that we do want to put in the needs statement don't reflect the city's budget, but will reflect the state's budget or the federal budget. So we need more opportunity to add a lot more words to the needs statement portion.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to reiterate that navigating the priorities was the biggest pain in the ass of this whole thing. Instead of dragging, maybe we could just put in a number. That might make it a lot easier. Some projects require multiple agencies. I did not see how to put it into a single category. I would like to be able to do that.
What are some examples of that one, just so we can...
One example of that, and this brings me back to a project that stretches back to the 1980s, is the rehabilitation of Fifth Avenue in my community, which is both DOT and DEP. And the reason I want to list both agencies is DOT has the money, but DEP does not have for their portion of it. So I would like to list it under both agencies and get a response from both agencies, because I would like it to reflect those different realities. And the final thing I wanted to say, in years past, the product that we got back had for capital 40 priorities and then 5 continuing support. This year lists 45 priorities, so I thank you for confusing my board members and giving me a lot to explain.
Anything else about the form in general? Did the structure of the form generally work for you? The policy areas?
I'm a very new district manager. I took on the job in April, and I had an existing form that some of the priorities had to be carried over, but now we have a new system, so I was told to put it on the computer. And I'm given a choice of 1 priority, but yet in the previous years, the board had maybe 3 or 4 for that particular area. So I had to pick, like picking your children, what is the most out of the 3 or 4? I was limited to the 1 choice instead of putting the top 3 or 4 that my board was concerned with.
I mean, that's the difference. What we did this year was asking for top issues, and indeed, we wanted you to pick between your children for that. What we did not want to do is take away the ability to prioritize and to have more than 1 priority within those different policy areas. Taking guidance from OMB, we still had the 25 expense and 40 capital requests that could be prioritized. We just thought that the issues would add another level of analysis. It could be that one agency gets a lot of requests that are relatively low priority. And then there is one request that might be a very high priority. And I think this is something that we wanted to tease out and be able to go to the agencies to tell them, like, look, you got, and we're talking about 3,300 budget requests that agencies get overall. We wanted to give the whole process a little bit more depth. So, but once again, we asked for issues. We didn't ask you for the needs to be only one need that you have to identify, and maybe we didn't make that clear enough, and want that, and obviously we can work on that to make it work better for you.
Okay, stop me if this is too idiosyncratic, but OMB knows well and has assisted me greatly in the past 4 years. CB14 does not like to prioritize. If we're talking about it, it's a priority. And I like Laura's idea, like picking among your children. Is that, who said that, Laura? Yeah. You can't, I mean, this is not a zero-sum game. And so a lot of my responses, I did as many priorities as the form required me to do in order to get to that other. And then in other, I generally said prioritizing these needs sort of defies the interlinking process, or we can't have one without the other, or we don't want one without the other. So I'm really prioritization resistant. Are those words? and so maybe this is too rogue, but could we consider not having to prioritize at all?
I think I know probably a lot of you have that frustration overall. I think some people will opt to do what you did every year, and and we will process it and sort of hand it off. I think what we're hearing from the agencies or as a city, there is a limited budget. It's that simple. And so we're trying to get your input as to, in that instance, what are your needs, and of that, make it easier for you to sort and identify and show jointly. So I think those are things that are valuable for us to hear.
Right.
Again, the boards can, in the end, submit however they want to submit. Our advice is the more you give us priority, the higher priority ones are going to get looked at more closely. They all get looked at.
I'm not sure if I believe that, but and fair enough. I understand. I understand the utility of priorities, from a practical point of view. But I felt as though, and this is skipping ahead, maybe it's a segue into the structure of the report itself. It felt a little bit punitive when, first of all, that the report, it's your report that we fed into, because it still says we asked CBs to do this, and this is what this one gave us. And so I didn't really even like that. But then where we didn't put in a priority, or it said, there was no high-level comment here, or or the other. It just felt a little bit negative in terms of how it reported out on our sort of resistance to priorities.
Yeah, I think again, it's a balancing act. We want to, if someone has a priority, we want to be able to get them to talk about it, and then if they don't put a priority in, if we leave it blank, people are like, well, where's the narrative? So I agree that the language maybe we should be more careful with.
The report doesn't have that we asked for this here. It just has what we gave you rather than what you asked for. Then nobody would know that we didn't answer that question in that at all.
I mean, it's a little bit this page intentionally left blank kind of thing. And I think we can definitely, we can talk about it, how to, what we want to avoid is that someone is looking for something that's not there, because the board didn't comment on it. Obviously, we don't want to make it sound in any way negative, but I think there is value for the agencies to see that this, maybe because the agencies are doing such great work, is not a priority in the district. We can work with you on the wording for that, but what we want to avoid is that the agency says, what is going on with community board, blah, 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 why isn't there something? And so, yeah.
I think, again, as Ralph said, there's 3,300 requests that come from all community boards. And so we feel like you're in a better, to the extent you're in a better position to prioritize your request in your community board than the agency is. I think there is value in you spending time on that. I know if there's 90 things to do, if it's number 77 versus 78, that maybe not matter as much, but these are sort of top 10 requests, and these are otherwise, it does send a signal to the agencies that this is really a crucial thing for the community board. Again, they're all going to get looked at, they're all have to be responded to, but we're trying to give you a chance to weight some of those to say, these are ones that we think are very valuable, and have the agencies have to think maybe a bit harder about the ones if they're not getting they're not producing the way you want.
So I understand that you keep saying 3,300 priorities for community boards. Is there any document that shows how successful we've been in advocating for these projects?
OMB can, I mean, there is, it's on public record, but OMB can
Is
comment
there
on
any,
it.
it shows that our, out of the 59 community boards, 30 of us got our #1 priorities funded. Is there anything like that?
We have it, I don't know, Lester or Jay, if you want to talk about what is in the public domain.
Yeah, right now, in terms of the published documents, well, first of all, you should know that there were approximately 500 different responses that the agencies used. And each one of those responses was categorized just by the wording of the response, because that's really the only thing we could go on, whether it was considered to be a positive, a neutral, or a negative response. And so what we published in the document was the percentage of requests recommended for funding. In other words, those that got a so-called positive response. We did it by agency. That's in the document. I don't know whether you've ever seen that. It looks like this.
The individual.
Yeah, but it's
Overall.
well, first of all, this is by agency. We have not published by either individual board or, as you say, by, let's say, #1 priority across the boards. Obviously, we could put those statistics together for you and get you those. Our feeling was we didn't want to be publishing statistics that, that contrast board by board. We didn't really see the value of that in our published document, but we can get you those statistics, obviously. We felt it was more important to show which agencies were really not providing positive responses.
Getting to Craig's point earlier about what might be considered a positive response or a negative response, something like the Department of Parks and Recreation, which always has the same response, which is seek funding from your elected officials, what would that be considered as?
A neutral response.
Okay, again, we would consider that a negative response.
Yeah.
And I think it would be interesting to see, if 59 community boards are making 150 requests to the Parks Department and we're getting 149 negative responses or that response, I think that would be interesting for all of us.
Yeah. We have and I don't know if we're going to get around to it today, but we have, we need to have a big discussion about the responses and where we go with that. You can look at the fact that we are publishing this document as, in some respect, tying our hands, or one hand at least, behind our backs. The document, and Sean talked about this in terms of we never have enough time. One of the logistical problems with publishing a document is that the agencies get 3,300 requests. They have a short amount of time to review and to respond to these requests, and they have to put these responses into this, small box in this document, and that, creates a lot of restrictions in terms of what is going to be published in the document. We need to have a wider discussion of maybe responses need to be provided in a different way, other than the document or in addition to the document.
I would absolutely agree with that. I'm only saying this because we are prioritizing.
Right.
So if we see a pattern that the Parks Department isn't funding anything, why would any of us make the Parks Department project a high priority?
Right.
Yeah, and so that, I think, becomes a larger discussion. I think we still want to have a document. You know, if you think about why the agencies were even asked to provide meaningless, and obviously they were never asked to provide meaningless, but that's what they are, why the agencies were asked to provide meaningless responses, and why didn't we just publish a document which had your request with no responses rather than meaningless responses. It was our thinking that the only way we would even have the slightest thought that the agencies had looked at your requests was if they had to publish a response. Because, you know, if we just published a document with your requests and gave it to the agencies and said, here's, you know, the board's request, but you're not required to provide a response for this document, then, you know, we have no idea that they've even looked at your requests. If there's a response there, and at least the response has something to do with the requests, then there's a slight chance that they read the request. So, you know, that was the bottom line idea about the responses. But we need to, you know, and so maybe we still want to have written responses, and maybe they'll still be meaningless, but what can we do then as either follow-up after the document comes out or whatever, you know, to get you more meaningful information, which is what Craig was talking about. It doesn't have to be a response, it's information. And that's, I think, what we want to get to. I mean, you and Craig mentioned about the negative letters. If we categorize the board's more of the agency's responses as negative, they're going to have to write you more letters, okay? You know what? I get copies of those letters. Those letters are as meaningless as the initial responses that they provided you. So we can categorize the example you gave as negative, and then they're going to write you a letter and say the same thing. So we need to get past all of that. That's what I think all of us, you know, would like to accomplish.
I mean, we'll come back in just a second to the borough budget consultations, which I think is part of this sort of same discussion about how we have more constructive dialogue with the agencies. The one thing I will say is, you know, again, part of this process is, you know, we're going out and talking to the agencies about, you know, their processes and how this works for them or how this doesn't work for them. And so part of the same input gathering is, so when we huddle and come up with a better way, you know, we want you to get better quality responses from the agencies, and we want to understand from them what's hindering them from doing that. So again, this is part of the joint exercise to try to improve the situation so that you feel good about the needs and the document you're getting at the end of it being suitable for a lot of different actors, and you also feel like your requests are being more seriously considered and the agencies feel like they can evaluate them quickly and fairly. So that's another set of inputs we're trying to get into the situation. You know, obviously, as the way Lester described it, it's not where we want to be. But again, I think the agencies want to hear from the community boards in a way that fits into their process as well. And so we're trying to get this whole, you know, puzzle pieces together. Ralph, do you want to hit on the last one on our side?
The next one that we want to discuss with you is about the new CD report that we produced for you. And some of the things that we heard from you was that the word limits were too tight, that you wanted to have more space to explain some of your needs, that the structure of the report is too restrictive, and what John and some of you already mentioned before, that it's more a report for city agencies but does not take into account other uses you as community boards have for those reports. For example, talking to your elected officials, talking to nonprofit organizations or business organizations within your district. Does that sort of summarize the problems you had with the report? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it summarizes it well, but I want to underscore, I think it doesn't even behoove the agencies to read however many times the community board provided. The community board submitted the following. I mean, to have the form within the document, it's not necessary, and it looks as though city planning hijacked our reports. I would like it to still read as though these are our reports. Yes, you're providing the structure and the support for the reports, but they should still be our reports and they read like yours.
Once again, this is where we try to balance the fact that there's 59 different reports and
All
different.
the more reason to cut out those words, so you don't read. That's 59 reports times however
Yeah,
many times.
we
those
can
words
we
are
can
in the
definitely
report.
talk about making it more more eloquent.
And again, the agencies haven't, so far, we've talked to probably, the 10 that are most impacted are all, that's not really come up as an issue for them. I appreciate that for the reasons you want it to be that way, but I don't want you to worry that that's hindering their ability to get through these. Other thoughts about the structure of the report? Is this last, how important is this last piece to you all in terms of making sure other audiences are accounted for?
Okay, so the last point that we have is about the borough budget consultations, and I would like to hand it over to you, our colleagues from OMB for that.
Okay, on consultations, I'm going to mention 3 areas that we know are problematic, have been problematic for years, and certainly were again problematic this year. And I'd then like to hear your thoughts on the consultations. We believe that the agencies should and must provide written responses to all of your agenda items in advance of the consultation sessions, so that you will have time to look at their responses and be able to perhaps even make some additional comments as to their responses if we have enough time to continue to do exchanges in advance of the consultations, but then certainly at the consultations be ready to challenge them based on having these written responses in advance. We also, of course, know that there is a problem with agency representation at the consultations. It's not the right people. It's not the people who could best be addressing your needs, and sometimes it's almost like no one is from the agency has even shown up. So we need to do a better job of getting better agency representation at the meetings. One of the thoughts we had was that if we can get the agencies to provide written responses in advance, they should attach to each written response who in the agency is going to be present to actually then address that particular item that they're providing the written response to, and that'll give all of us a chance to do, maybe if we have enough time, a little research to see whether the right person is going to be there, if that person even shows up, to address that particular request or that agenda item. And the third area is follow-up. A lot of issues are raised at the consultation meetings that require follow-up by the agencies, provide you with written follow-up, and they need to do that. And they need to do that in a timely fashion, because there's very little time then after the consultations in which you're going back and putting your final submissions together. And so very often you need that follow-up information. So we need to be able to get the agencies to address your questions at consultation that need follow-up. Those are three big areas that we certainly are aware of, have always been aware of, and we need to do a better job on them. But I'd like to hear your comments now on those three areas and additional areas of regarding the borough budget consultations. Yeah, Jeremy.
So I'd like to go back to the old format. We had individual consultations with various agencies. The reason being, most of what goes on in the borough budget consultations are actually district budget consultations, quite frankly, because our interests are our own district, which makes sense. But when we have 18 of us questioning Department of Sanitation for 2 hours, that's less than 7 minutes a person. Per district. Previously, it had been 20 minutes for each agency. You got to pick and choose which agencies. You weren't forced to sit through a particular agency you didn't want to, or you had no need to sit through so you could get to the next one. So I'd like to put on the table that I'd like to go back to the old system with individual consultations.
Okay. The only thing I would say about that right now, because I'd like to talk to everyone more about it, is as a number of you know, I asked when Peter left, prior to last year, whether you would be willing to do just the day group consultations this past year, which would make my life easier because it was the first year I was doing it. And we came to an agreement that you would be willing to do that for 1 year, which was last year, and then we would revisit it. I'm going on record saying, yes, I want to revisit it with you. Obviously, from a logistical standpoint, it presents more challenges for what is a smaller unit in OMB than has been in the past, because we're talking about a lot more meetings that have to be set up and be covered by a small staff. I suppose that we might be talking about evening meetings. My feeling is you're going to get worse representation by agencies at evening meetings than you are during day meetings, but that's my feeling. But I'm certainly, I promised you, that we would, that the door was not shut, that I had asked you for just 1 year and then we would, talk about it again, and I stand by that promise. Any more comments about that right now, or should we talk about that more at another point? Yeah.
Well, as one of the earliest advocates for the group consultations, probably 3 or more years before we really started to roll it out, I want to formally go on record and say that in many cases it clearly has not worked. I think that for many of the social service agencies, it does work because the information they're providing is fairly uniform district by district. But if you just look at the agendas for, say, the Department of Sanitation, those are serial individual consultations held jointly. That's not a group consultation. But, we go through the CV1 concerns, and the CV2 concerns, and the CV3 concern. I think that, and I'm sympathetic to the fact that both the mayoral agencies and OMB would prefer to go all group consultations in all 5 boroughs. But I think that we gave this a fair chance, and there are certainly agencies that, in my opinion, it just clearly does not work.
I don't know, though, if all hope is lost for the group consultation. There's a possibility that with additional support, perhaps from OMB, to take our individual requests and distill them into general questions, general agenda items, we could have a more meaningful group consultation. The onus has been foisted upon district managers, foisted maybe is too strong, but we've taken on the onus of developing agendas, and I don't know if we don't have access to the information the way you do in terms of figuring out what's come in the prior year, what received what response from the agency, and taking that information as well as the concerns from individual community districts and just creating a generalized agenda from that. One way or the other, it's going to be a lot of work, either finding individuals or distilling into agendas, but there is the possibility of doing that.
Yeah, I think I want to make a couple of comments. One thing we did try last year was, for the first time, we put out the spreadsheets, which we took all the agenda items and parsed them out into spreadsheets, which you saw in the minutes, and we asked the agencies to use those as forms for putting together the answers, because if they populated the spreadsheet, your questions were answered. Not a lot of them did it. We have an intern going through those spreadsheets to find out what are the common questions across the boroughs that come up for the agencies to do exactly that. So we're engaged in that, so we're talking about some things internally that we'll come back to you on, about how to develop the agendas and come up with generic questions. So I think that, I like that suggestion because I'm thinking the same way, and we're discussing it. And I think following up on Rob's, when we come back and ask you, as Lester has said, is it okay if we ask you, can these agencies be grouped and these may need more individual rather than being black and white, all group or all individual? Is that a fair way to present the question to you all as a group when we come back?
Not to turn this into a group versus individual. I agree with Rob. For some agencies, we can do the group. Me personally, I don't like the group. I like individual, particularly when it comes to capital projects. And if you have several capital projects with a particular agencies, I get frustrated in the group because we're on a time limit in the group, and everybody in here wants to have a conversation about their particular, and I don't blame them. They want to have a conversation about their particular budget request, an in-depth conversation with that agency, and you can't do it in a group setting. That gets me. I get frustrated in the group setting when we're dealing with capital project, particularly when I have several for a particular agency. So some it can work, but some agencies, as Rob stated, I'm strictly with the individual.
So we're going to ask you that we're going to send out something over the next few. I don't know what's happening. I can't speak for Lester.
But we will send you something. Which agent, and we'll ask for input from each of you, which agencies can work in a group format, which agencies require individual consultations, and we'll see what your feedback is. And
One of the things that I remember, because I've been around for quite a while, and some of you may remember, is that a number of years ago, for a few agencies, DOT, DEP, maybe parks, so-called district consultations were handled in a way that those DOT and DEP specifically, I think, here in Brooklyn, their offices, their capital division offices, were in the municipal building right across the street. And what we did for those agencies, for your district consultations, maybe during the month of June, but we could do this in September, is that rather than at night, it would be held during the day, because this is what happened, many years ago, and the boards shuttled in to the DOT offices in the municipal building. So from 9 to 9:30, Brooklyn Community Board 1 showed up in room, 303 in the municipal building, which was DOT's Capitol office. And then at 9:30, Board 2 showed up. This way, we knew that we had a captive audience because DOT's Capital Division people, that's where they are, you know, and that would be during their workday. You know, so if they weren't at this meeting, it's really sort of shame on them, you know, as opposed to trying to get these people out at night. It's just one thought. Okay, you know, as Jay said, we need to now talk about this, you know, in the next couple of weeks and nail it down. And a good place to start would be you telling us which agencies you want individual sessions with. Okay. Anything else about borough consultations?
Chime in specifically on the point about not having agency representation at the consultation meetings, or not having the right people from the agencies. To the extent that we know we're having trouble with that, you know, let our office know. As a result of in the earlier Borough Service Cabinet meetings where we had very little agency participation, the Borough President made it a point of bringing it up to the Mayor directly, and we have a commitment to have any agency that we need here to be responsive to any issues that we're facing at the Borough Service Cabinet. So if we're not getting agencies to come to the consultation meetings, we're not getting the right people, that I think falls within the same scope as not coming to a Borough Service Cabinet meeting, and we'll follow up directly with the Mayor's office to make sure that the agencies are coming. So if there are people who are not attending or agencies who are not participating in good faith, please let us know, and we'll follow up directly to make sure that they are participating in the process.
Okay, I think we can incorporate that into what we are going to be you know, sending out to you very soon in terms of which agencies you want to have individual consultations with. We can also ask you which agencies you feel are underrepresented, or fully represented, and for that list, we can compile it and present it to the Borough President's office. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, I think we should wrap it up. The last slide you see are some next steps. And on our end, what we're planning to do, so this is the second borough we're in. We started with Manhattan. We want to go to all 5 boroughs by March, the latest. Based on the feedback we received today, and what we're also planning on doing is having maybe a workshop format where every board is invited to attend, and we can discuss in more depth individual parts of the process that we talked about today. So we were thinking of having a workshop on the form, on the timeline, and so on. We would like to have those as soon as we have gone through all the 5 boroughs. And then, based on those results from the workshops with you, would like to report back to you, to this forum, to get a consensus on the changes for this year's form and process. And keeping in mind what we decided today, that we want to get all the changes done no later than June 1st. Is that something that you are okay with? Any comments?
When do we think we can come back and have a follow-up conversation? We're talking about April, we're talking May. When's the appropriate time to give you guys enough time to internalize the feedback and also produce something that we can then review?
It depends a little bit on how we can time the conversations with the other boroughs. That's basically the big unknown at this moment. So we haven't been able to get back, or they didn't get back to us. But obviously we would like to do that in April if the stars align.
Okay, so we can tentatively shoot for like the April Borough Service Cabinet meeting, perhaps, to do a follow-up conversation.
Yeah.
And if we can always move back to May if need be.
Yes, and obviously I think it's in everyone's interest to keep a tight ship and move this forward.
Sorry, and thanks so much for all the indulgence today. The other suggestion I have, both for OMB and for city planning, is to attend, and I know I know it's resources, but to attend our district service cabinet meetings. I think seeing what we are dealing with in terms of service delivery on the ground would also help inform the process from your respective responsibilities in it.
I think that's a good idea. I started out as a borough planner, so I had the pleasure of being to district service cabinet meetings. But I think they're very important venues, and I think also when we discuss all those things, we should keep an open mind and also see how those different interactions with city agencies fit together and how we can make them all more efficient.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anything else?
I just want to thank everybody and hope everybody in terms of I don't know, I haven't kept up with Carolyn, how many people from have responded to our survey on the consultation?
Just 5, so please get those in.
Yeah, so please, we've stimulated a lot of really good ideas today. We're going to come back with some more specific questions, but whatever's hot in your mind, if you have time when you go back to the office over the next couple days since this meeting, freshen the issues, please send those questionnaires back, and whatever thoughts you have about that, please send them back to Carolyn. And we really appreciate you all sitting here and spending all the time and giving us all this great constructive feedback.
Yeah, thank you very much for City Planning as well. I know it's, we appreciate you spending time on it. I know it was frustrating for many of you, but hopefully you can see we're committed to making it better and moving forward in this direction. Thank you.
So I just want to chime in with a comment and a question. The first thing is I think I want to kind of reiterate Sean's point earlier about just some of the language that's used, and I think that ownership of the document is a really important thing, and not only in terms of capturing other third parties' viewpoints in the process, but also in terms of other third parties viewing the documents. So I think considering the language around ownership is really, really important from the community board standpoint. And I don't think that takes away anything from DCP's ownership of the process or the structure, but I think having the ownership of the reporting itself is really important to satisfy a lot of different constituencies. So I'd really urge you to look at that very carefully moving forward. And the last point I want to kind of see if we can figure out a way forward is on the agency response side. I know that was a big part of Craig's comments, and I know, Lester, you said that was a big challenge that you've identified as well. So I guess my question initially is to OMB, what can we do? Have you already engaged in a conversation with agencies on reviewing the response process? Is that something that we need to be doing more of here? What's the best way moving forward from your perspective so we can actually see some of these changes and not just talk about them?
Yeah, I think that a good starting point would be for us to get your specific input on paper for us to then be able to present to the agencies. So I'm wondering whether it should be in the form of a survey questionnaire or whether it would just be something that you individually would like to prepare on your own in a less structured way. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? But I think we need to be able to take to present your input to the agencies. Does anyone have any thoughts on the structure of us providing your input to the agencies?
What I would, and this is just speaking for me, and I'm happy to have this idea shot down by members here, I wonder if it makes sense to have that be a topic of conversation when we have all the agencies around the table at a future meeting. That we allow the district managers to put together that list and those ideas, and then that be an agenda item, perhaps at a full cabinet meeting when we have everyone around the table. We can do another presentation. I don't know if the changes will be in time for this year's process, but maybe we look at the future years going forward, that we make that an agenda item and that we have all the agencies here. We have a presentation from OMB on from how you guys manage the process, and then we use that as a jumping off point for a productive conversation. And I'm happy to have that idea shot down, if so be.
Well, I don't want to speak for the community boards, but I just want to, I think that's a great idea, but I think there needs to be, as Lester said, an intermediate step that we need to hear from the community boards what they'd like presented so that we could digest that and present their viewpoint to the agencies rather than just having an open conversation unstructured. Because it makes a big difference if we do our homework, and although he's not here right now, I would volunteer Craig because he made the clearest statement about the problem. No?
So I think...
But if a subcommittee of the community board district managers could get together and say, we'll make sure everybody talks to each other.
Right. So my suggestion was, and I didn't articulate this clearly, was that we identify in advance the suggestions, the commentary, the criticisms, the everything in advance, way in advance, and then we have the meeting structured around those topic points, with everyone prepared to discuss. The only thing I didn't want to do is to have a list prepared given to you, and then you guys be the middlemen dealing with the agencies, and then the agency's like, oh, well, we can't, I don't want there to be anything to get lost in translation. So I thought having the list, the concrete list of ideas or suggestions, and then we have some time, we can figure out the right way to structure the meeting around that, but have that be the topic of substantive conversation with everyone around the table, unless I'm being too naive and idealistic here.
That, and to answer your question directly, I think that it always helps to have a bit of a survey prompt. It doesn't have to be a survey, formal survey, but a few questions with a prompt and then some open-ended answers and then other.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll do that. Absolutely. But I think that the point was in that at a meeting where agencies are present, I and our team can speak about restrictions in terms of a document that we are going to be publishing. And obviously we understand your frustrations, but those frustrations have to be vocalized by you, the boards. I think that absolutely.
So, did someone here have a comment? I thought I saw a hand. No. So, with that in mind, our next full scheduled cabinet meeting is April. I don't know if that's enough time in order to actually effectuate the changes for the October process or not. So the next dates we have that come to mind are April, September, December, where we have everyone around the table. We can change that if need be, but given the process and the schedule that you have to already follow, what time makes most sense from your perspective in order to have that conversation?
Well, I think that we can have...
I mean the full conversation. Yeah, obviously there'll be work leading up.
No, I think that April... Having that full conversation in April gives us enough time to then implement any changes that can be implemented. And that the agencies, of course, then will, pony up to in terms of their responsibilities, because the boards will not be submitting their final requests until October 31st. I think that's staying intact, that date. And, the document wouldn't be produced until the end of next January. So I think to the extent that we get useful decisions made, starting with a meeting in April, we have plenty of time.
Okay. And we can gather everybody's input to put together a good agenda between now and April.
Perfect. April it is.
Yeah.
Good.
One thing, I think we shouldn't overload the agenda for April if we talk about, or we have to structure it in a way that we don't take away your time with the agencies, but also I think we said that we would come back in April to discuss form and process changes. So I think we have to come up with a way of having enough time for both issues.
Right. So I think we have time on the agenda right now for April. We're okay there. And I think this is just the first start in a very long conversation, and I think with everyone understanding that, we can structure the conversation to be substantive and productive without being too long. Even though I know everyone loves staying at Borough Hall on Tuesday mornings, it's the thrill of a lifetime, I get it. We can do it. I think we can do it effectively and be okay. But we're aware of that, thank you.
We will get you, by the way, a printout, by board of your top 5 priorities, whether they were given a subjective, positive, neutral, negative response based on, the way we right now evaluate what did in this past go-around, the responses that you got. So we'll get that to you.
And when would be the ideal time for you guys to receive feedback from the district managers to prepare for April? How much time do you need from our end?
We will obviously need to compile,
I think we'll get out a survey within the next week.
Oh, we'll get out a survey.
At least out within the next week.
Right, okay.
And I think, I don't want to leave the time open too much while it's fresh in everybody's mind. I think if we get it out in the next week, we'll give probably 2 weeks from when we set it out to make sure we get feedback, and that will give us plenty of time. But I don't want to leave it, of course, the deadline on us to get the survey out or the responses back too open-ended. So we're going to commit to getting something out in a week. And then we're going to ask you all to get back to us within 2 weeks after that.
Do you have a date for the April meeting?
The April meeting, of course I do. The April meeting is Tuesday, April 12th.
All right. That's all right. I mean, we should be able to get you, as Sean said, it really does not have to be, very long or involved survey. So, we can get it out to you. As Jay said, if we were having 2 weeks, we should be able to focus on it and get back to us and give us a chance to compile it. I think that, obviously, it's not something we want to just, unleash on the agencies. We probably need to then get it out to the agencies in advance.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, so we'll get the survey out, we'll get your responses, we'll send a draft back to all of you all to give you a week or less to say yes, no, and then we'll send it to the agencies. I'm not looking at a calendar, but that seems to work by April 12th.
Perfect. Okay, terrific. Any other questions, comments on this agenda item? Any other comments for DCP or OMB? Great, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we have our final agenda item. Just a quick update on our upcoming meetings. Obviously, you see we're going to have a full meeting in April, which is exciting. Very exciting. I just want to give you all an update. The March 8th meeting, we have scheduled to attend the Buildings Commissioner. Commissioner Chandler will be attending. I know there's been a number of outstanding issues with DOB, and similar to what we did with DEP, and it'll be a chance for us to kind of curate a list of ongoing issues of concern to present to the Commissioner and then have a response from the agency. So, additionally, the May 10th meeting, we're going to have the DOT Commissioner come here to do the same thing. So what I'm going to ask the DMs to do, and whether you do this all at once or you do it once for DOB, once for DOT, like we did with DEP, you all got together, you came up with a list of, I think it was 4 issues, and there was a little presentation that went along with it. I think that'd be a very helpful model to follow for these additional commissioner meetings. So I'll leave it on you guys to come up with the agenda for both the DOB and the DOT meetings, so we can pass it on to their office and we can have a meaningful conversation when they're here. Does that make sense? Does anyone want to volunteer to take the lead on organizing that, so we have some follow-up? Not yet?
You want to do it, Sean? Okay, that's fine. Yeah, you could do.
You want to take DOB and you take DET? We have two, so.
Take one each. Joanne did a wonderful job.
But we only want to gather
DEP.
once to deal with both of them in the same meeting, yeah?
Yes, we'll do it.
Yeah.
Did you're.
Okay.
Like you said,
I'll reach out, set a date, and if you're all willing to come to the CD14 office or perhaps space here, we can set that up.
Okay.
who has DOB?
Sean?
DOB?
Let's do both together.
We're going to do one meeting to do both,
Both together.
to have both conversations with you guys, and then we can figure out who actually does the presentation here. That's a separate thing, but you guys can figure that out amongst yourselves, who you want to have give the lead on the agenda. So that's all I have. Is there any other old business that anyone wants to discuss? Any new business? Okay, so we'll see everyone March 8th. Thank you.
All right.